Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief. Today is July 21, 2026. And, we are unpacking a massive stack of reports today.
We really are. I mean, it's a mix of military updates, civic dispatches, and economic data.
Right. Our mission today is to analyze all of this, to understand a world where traditional power structures, whether that's military command, political leadership, or just basic civic trust, are undergoing radical stress tests. But I want to start immediately with the rapidly escalating U.S.-Israel war on Iran.
Which makes sense because the situation is presenting this stark, almost jarring contradiction between military escalation and economic maneuvering.
The concrete impacts on global stability and, frankly, on household budgets are hitting a critical threshold this week. So on the military front, what are we seeing?
Well, the Pentagon is actively requesting a massive $80 billion supplemental funding package to sustain operations. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faced a pretty furious Congress over these mounting costs.
Yeah, I mean, $80 billion is a staggering number to justify.
It is. Hegseth defended the expenditure by arguing that Iran's military capabilities are, severely degraded.
But the facts on the ground reflect a much more volatile reality than just a degraded adversary. I mean, since February, 17 U.S. troops have been killed in the region. We just saw the loss of Sergeant Michael Emanuel Swinton in Iraq.
Yeah, the human cost is mounting. And the geographic footprint of the tension is expanding, too. President Trump is publicly threatening to target the Pickaxe Mountain area.
And simultaneously, you have the Houthis announcing a blockade that specifically targets Saudi ports, which has to have massive logistical ripples.
Right, absolutely. That blockade is already triggering major disruptions. You have oil tankers loaded with Saudi crude, originally bound for China and India, literally making U-turns in the Red Sea.
Wait, they are just turning around mid-journey?
Yeah, they're abandoning their routes and heading back toward the Suez Canal just to avoid being targeted by missile or drone strikes.
And when massive oil tankers are forced to abandon their routes like that, the public consequence is immediate. I mean, shipping risks translate directly into increased global energy costs.
Because the moment insurance premiums for those vessels spike.
Right. Or the journeys take 3 weeks longer. That friction is passed down the supply chain. It directly threatens household budgets and drives up inflation at the consumer level.
Which brings us to the core contradiction I mentioned earlier regarding this geopolitical strategy. Because at the exact same time the United States is escalating military action and asking for that $80 billion, the Trump administration signed a memorandum of understanding offering Iran a substantial economic lifeline.
I have to push back on the logic of that maneuver. How does a government simultaneously fund a kinetic war against an adversary while signing a document that financially empowers them? What is the actual mechanism of this memorandum?
It relies on 60-day U.S. sanctions waivers. So functionally, these waivers temporarily lift the legal penalties on foreign entities purchasing Iranian crude. It allows Tehran to ramp up its oil exports.
Okay, so it's a short-term leash.
Exactly. The 60-day window keeps the economic relief strictly temporary and revocable. But additionally, the agreement outlines a proposed $300 billion reconstruction fund backed by Gulf states.
A $300 billion fund feels like an enormous concession during an active conflict. How is that being justified domestically?
The architects of the policy emphasize that this is a conditional, pay-for-performance arrangement. The Gulf states are not simply handing over cash. The funds are essentially held in escrow.
Got it. So Iran has to actually prove they are complying before seeing a dime of that money.
Right. The funds are only dispersed if Iran meets specific, verifiable benchmarks regarding its behavior and curbs its nuclear ambitions. It is an attempt to use localized economic leverage to force diplomatic concessions, even while the broader military conflict rages.
But regardless of the financial leverage being applied on paper, the human consequences on the ground are devastating. In the West Bank, a severe militant settler raid in the village of Deir el-Jarir just left 2 Palestinians dead.
Yeah, that was a brutal incident.
One of those casualties was 53-year-old Oda Farajna. He was a local florist and a village council member.
And the civilian toll in Gaza is also compounding. Recent Israeli strikes killed at least 12 people, including 6 members of the al-Masri family in the al-Sabr neighborhood.
And this comes despite explicit warnings from the UN Human Rights Office. They are stating plainly that the density of the conflict means nowhere in Gaza is currently safe for civilians.
The sheer financial cost and the staggering human tragedy of these conflicts really demand a closer look at how modern wars are actually fought and commanded. We're seeing a massive structural shift in Eastern Europe that illustrates this perfectly.
Yes, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just enacted a sweeping shakeup of Ukraine's military command. He dismissed his 60-year-old army commander, Oleksandr Syrskyi.
Because Syrskyi represents the old guard. He is a Soviet-trained general who relied on traditional attrition-based military doctrine. His replacement is 43-year-old Mikhailo Drapati, which signals a huge generational pivot.
But this leadership change did not just happen in a vacuum. It follows massive street protests in Kyiv over the earlier removal of the 35-year-old defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov.
And Fedorov is entirely emblematic of this generational divide. He's a reformer who spearheaded an IT army and heavily leaned into drone warfare.
But the specific tactics he introduced require serious scrutiny. Fedorov pushed for the literal gamification of war. He designed a digital system that awards military units with, credits for successfully hitting Russian assets.
Which is wild. Implementing a digital reward economy for lethal combat fundamentally alters the psychology of engagement. You are applying the behavioral incentives of a mobile app to life-and-death military operations.
And it strips away basic human accountability. When you apply a tech bro optimization mindset to warfare, you introduce severe moral stakes.
You really do.
Prioritizing autonomous weapons and robotized combat to maximize a credit score removes the gravity of human decision-making from the battlefield. The civic danger here is assuming that an app can cleanly manage the messy, tragic reality of violence.
But the tension between cheap, rapidly innovating technology and traditional military oversight isn't isolated to Ukraine. Ukraine's heavy reliance on disposable drones is actively exposing massive structural failures in how the rest of Europe buys its weapons.
Oh, for sure. You look at the European defense industry, and they are struggling to rearm despite throwing unprecedented amounts of money at the problem. Germany's regular defense budget has surged to roughly $114 billion.
Yeah, yet the bureaucracy is stalling actual progress, because pouring capital into a rigid system does not yield a modern fighting force. The clearest example of this failure is the Future Combat Air System, or FCAS.
Right, the massive jet program that's been stalling out for years.
Exactly. This was a Franco-German initiative with a budget exceeding $114 billion to build a next-generation fighter jet. And that massive project was just scrapped entirely due to corporate disagreements between the lead manufacturers.
The friction there is completely structural. You have aerospace corporations trying to protect their intellectual property and secure decades of guaranteed government contracts for expensive legacy weapons, like fighter jets.
Right, but the reality of the modern battlefield requires cheap, rapidly manufactured drone technology. Massive defense contractors are simply not built to operate like agile tech startups.
Meanwhile, while nations struggle to modernize their defense capabilities to secure their borders, they are simultaneously facing intense internal fractures. The fundamental social contract and basic civic trust between governments and their citizens are buckling.
It's happening everywhere, across multiple continents.
Before we detail exactly how that domestic trust is breaking down, a quick reminder that for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, you can visit clarinaratio.com.
So the scale of that institutional fracture is highly visible in India right now. The country is navigating a massive education crisis that has literally spilled into the streets. Tens of thousands of young people are protesting in Delhi.
And they are protesting under the banner of the Cockroach Janta Party, demanding the immediate resignation of Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan, because the catalyst for this fury is the leak of the NEET medical exams.
Which is huge because this is a highly competitive centralized test taken by 2.28 million students. When a single exam acts as the sole bottleneck for the social mobility of millions, a leak compromises the entire promise of meritocracy.
And the human tragedy stemming from this failure is profound. The cancellation and immense stress surrounding the compromised exam have been directly linked to 20 student suicides.
It's awful. And furthermore, the state's response to the legitimate grievances of these students has been overwhelmingly aggressive, deploying batons and tear gas to clear the demonstrations.
We're seeing a parallel crisis of institutional trust unfolding in Italy, specifically regarding law enforcement. In Bologna, thousands of citizens are protesting the death of Abderrahim Fakir, a Moroccan-born man who died during a police encounter.
The details are deeply troubling. Fakir was pinned face down and pepper-sprayed by police officers, dying while being restrained.
The aftermath of his death has exposed a sharp fracture in Italian politics. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni issued a statement declaring that nothing justifies violence against law enforcement, signaling strong alignment with state security forces.
While conversely, Bologna's mayor, Matteo Lepore, publicly expressed solidarity with Fakir's grieving family. So it highlights a stark division between national state authority and local community empathy.
To really underscore this theme of institutional failure, consider a remarkably ironic situation that just occurred in Nigeria. Police officers were arrested after setting up an illegal, unauthorized checkpoint.
Just for a shakedown, essentially.
Exactly. Their goal was straightforward extortion. They pulled over a driver and demanded a bribe of roughly $38.
But the systemic failure was fully exposed by the identity of their victim. Because the driver they extorted was Musa Aliyu, who happens to be the head of Nigeria's anti-corruption agency.
You cannot make that up. The officers tasked with enforcing the law arbitrarily extorted the nation's top anti-corruption official. When the daily reality for citizens is that the enforcers of the state are the primary predators, civic trust evaporates entirely.
It really does. Navigating these profound domestic and international crises requires steady, predictable political leadership. Yet, Western democracies are currently defined by high volatility and a surge in economic populism.
Like in the United Kingdom, Andy Burnham has officially taken office as Britain's 7th prime minister in a single decade. Burnham, who is often called the King of the North, brings deep working-class roots to the position.
Burnham's political mandate is to rebuild degraded public services, but he faces immense fiscal constraints doing that. He inherits a public deeply skeptical of the state's capacity to deliver anything.
Plus, global financial markets severely limit his ability to actually fund those reforms through borrowing.
Right. And in the United States, economic populism is translating directly into aggressive trade policies. President Trump has announced new 50% tariffs on Canadian goods, targeting cars, dairy, and hockey sticks.
He justified the policy by stating that Canada, quote, needs us to survive. But that geopolitical posturing obscures the immediate mechanical reality of a tariff. A 50% levy is not a tax paid by the Canadian government.
No, it is a tax collected at the border and ultimately absorbed by the domestic supply chain. The direct public consequence is that consumers will face significantly higher prices for those imported goods.
While cross-border commercial relations endure severe strain, and the U.S. political spectacle is generating unprecedented volatility in other ways, too. Right now, we're analyzing the theoretical 2028 presidential run of Hunter Biden.
Yeah, he has built this prolific social media presence defined by online feuds with J.D. Vance and Donald Trump Jr.
But dismissing this as mere digital gossip ignores a fundamental shift in political norms. The historian Kim Phillips Fain actually addresses the structural forces behind this kind of spectacle in her newly published book, Country of Lords.
It's a fascinating look at how extreme wealth concentration fundamentally warps democratic institutions. It critiques the modern tech utopians and social Darwinists who believe their immense capital makes them immune to traditional governance.
The book points out the danger of the monopoly of one concept. When individuals possess enough wealth to operate as sovereign entities, it actively dismantles the democratic ideal of equality.
Whether they're dictating political discourse, shaping defense procurement, or funding entire political factions.
And this political fragmentation is a global phenomenon. In Turkey, the ousted opposition leader Özgür Özel is forming a completely new political party in the midst of President Erdogan's crackdown on dissent.
Political coalitions everywhere are splintering. But while political leaders maneuver through tariffs and factional disputes, they remain responsible for protecting their citizens from undeniable physical realities.
Because the environment does not respect political borders or ideological debates. The climate data from France makes that brutally clear. The country is battling tragic wildfires fueled by extreme heat waves.
A massive blaze near the Bordeaux airport recently killed 2 firefighters. And nationally, France has seen over 100,000 acres destroyed this year alone.
But contrasting that ongoing devastation is a remarkable story of proactive human adaptation. While climate change presents an accelerating threat, nations situated along fault lines have spent decades proving that societies can engineer structural resilience against massive shocks.
The strategies for earthquake resilience offer a vital blueprint here. Japan operates an intricate early warning system that detects the initial, less destructive seismic waves.
That provides citizens and automated transit networks with critical seconds to prepare.
Right. And Chile fundamentally changed its trajectory after a catastrophic event in 1960 by implementing and rigorously enforcing strict national building codes.
Mexico developed the SASMEX alert system to provide inland population centers with a minute of advanced warning. And in Canada, cities like Vancouver are proactively establishing disaster support hubs within libraries and community centers.
Ensuring local neighborhoods have immediate access to emergency logistics when things break down.
The engineering principles utilized in those Japanese buildings provide a profound analogy for everything we have discussed today. When engineers build a skyscraper in a seismic zone, they do not design it to be entirely rigid.
Because if a building stubbornly resists the violent movement of the earth, the concrete shatters and the structure collapses.
Instead, they use seismic isolation systems. They design the building to sway and absorb the shock waves, and that is exactly how modern governments must design their civic institutions.
It's a great point. If political frameworks, defense bureaucracies, and legal systems remain rigid in the face of autonomous technology, economic populism, and climate stress, they will just snap.
Today's briefing does not present a single unified narrative of collapse, but rather distinct pressures moving in radically different directions. We are tracking the high-tech, gamified evolution of military engagement, the severe straining of domestic civic contracts from New Delhi to Bologna, and the urgent necessity for physical and institutional resilience.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over. As technological innovation drastically outpaces bureaucratic regulation, whether we're talking about autonomous drones making lethal decisions on a battlefield or extreme tech wealth fundamentally reshaping politics.
How do we ensure that the pursuit of progress doesn't entirely strip away basic human accountability? If our institutions are going to survive the shocks of this century, their flexibility must be rooted in our shared humanity. Thank you for joining us. For more daily briefings and deep explorations of the world's most pressing issues, visit clarinaratio.com.